we're pretty far into the NBA season at this point, obviously approaching the All-Star break. And I think at this point, we can really look at all the records and look at all the teams, and we can say, we know generally what teams are contending right now. Obviously, anything's possible. We saw the Heat last year go on an absolute tear, light up the friggin' entire Eastern Conference, and make their way to the finals. Obviously, total like crazy runs aside, we are going to look at the teams who in both conferences have the best shots at winning the championship right now. I'm going to start out in the East. Pretty simple. Boston Celtics, Milwaukee Bucks, locks. That's probably the Eastern Conference Finals if seeding stays the way that it is. I do like New York, and I just don't know that they're really contenders. I do think it's possible that they could knock off someone like Milwaukee. They're going to give anyone a tough matchup, a tough seven, especially the teams like Cleveland or Indiana. I think those are going to be rough matchups for them. Depends where everyone lies, seeding wise, too, because I think Milwaukee and Boston are pretty much locked in the top two seeds, but everyone else, I mean, hey, anything can happen. And obviously, this is really before the full trade deadline. We know the Siakam trade to Indiana has happened, but there's still some pieces that could be on the move that shake things up. But as of right now, when this video is being recorded, what teams, right? Philly, I'm never going to put Philly as a contender. I just can't do it. I need to see Philly with Embiid make it out of the second round. How are they supposed to contend for a title if they haven't made it out of the second round? You didn't even sniff a conference finals, let alone a finals appearance, let alone a finals victory. Like, to me, contending is really four teams, and it's the four that are at the end. The final four teams, those are contenders. So for me, there's a lot of great picks in the Eastern Conference. There's a lot of tough teams. I think if Milwaukee or Boston goes into it with the wrong mindset, and they underestimate some of these Eastern Conference teams, I think they're going to give them a run for their money. I just don't see teams on that path like to a championship the way that Boston clearly is. And I do believe, despite the coaching drama, I really do think that the Bucks are going to, run the table in the East as well. As for the West, I think the two clear contenders right now are the Nuggets and the Clippers. The Clippers, they're too talented. They're too talented. They have too much like cohesion between their stars right now. The only thing that would hold back the Clippers is health. James Harden, obviously not getting any younger. Kawhi and Paul George, both consistent injury concerns there. And then, needless to say, the defending champion Nuggets, that pretty obviously they're contenders, right? So I think if I have to narrow it down to four teams, two in each conference, Celtics, Bucks, Nuggets, Clippers. The West is rough though because you've got the OKC Thunder, who are a young, scrappy team. They're scary, but I don't know that I can see either of them knocking off the Clippers or the Nuggets. I just don't see it. There's not enough experience there to where I'm like they're going to make the finals or they could make the finals. Definitely could see one of these. Like I'm gonna do the next tier now of like teams I could see sneaking into the conference finals. Like the Timberwolves are definitely one. Like defensively, they're set up for the playoffs. Like they're really good. Um, I like Phoenix. Like I said, we're gonna have to see what Phoenix does at the deadline. Right now, they're the sixth seed, so anything's possible. You get healthy at the right time. They've got a lot of good bucket getters. They do have some good role players like Josh Okogie and Grayson Allen. Like I like those guys. Health determines a lot in the playoffs, but I just think that the Nuggets and Clippers are a tier above them. I still like Phoenix though. I think Phoenix is definitely Phoenix and the Timberwolves are both two teams that I could see, edging off someone like probably the Clippers would be the team. I don't see the Nuggets not making the finals again. I just don't see it. But that being said, It is possible. Anything's possible. Like I said, injuries are obviously a bitch in the playoffs, and you can't control stuff like that. The Clippers, straight up, if everyone's healthy, they're going to be fine. Like, I really think the Clippers are the only team in the West right now that could knock off the Nuggets, like in a 7-game series. That's just because they have so much defense. Like, their team is stacked, and they have a ton of depth too. Like, Westbrook's not even getting crazy amounts of minutes because you still have guys like Norman Powell that are eating up that time. Like, PJ Tucker's just sitting there. You know what I mean? He's not even like a part of it. He doesn't even get minutes. Like, that's how stacked this team is. So I don't know. I just think that it's kind of those four teams and everyone else. Um, but the West has a lot of good teams, man. Like, the Lakers could make that like second half season turnaround push that they made last year. They got to the conference finals. I think the Warriors are out of it at this point, but you still have teams like Sacramento and I can't say New Orleans. I want to, though. I really want the Pelicans to be good and dependable in the playoffs. I just feel like they have to be first round exits just with how talented the West is. Obviously the Mavericks too. Like, the West is so stacked. Like, there's not a bad playoff matchup that's going to happen in the West. Obviously in the East things are a little less, saturated talent wise, but there's still really a lot of good teams in that middle spot. If you go down the line, you got Boston, Milwaukee, Philly, Cleveland, New York, Indiana, Orlando, Miami. There's a lot of good teams, is the point there. And I think that, any of those teams could make like the second round. It's really hard to say right now because, again, matchups are so important. Like, if Orlando makes the playoffs, but, they're the eighth seed and they have to go against Boston, like, come on, like, they're not going to upset Boston. There's no way. The Celtics they would not do that. They're too stacked of a team. Unless they got seriously, seriously injured, they're not bowing out in the first round. They can't. But if Orlando secures like a top 4 seed somehow and has an amazing second half of the year, then they have a more favorable matchup against the 5 seed. So you know what I mean? Like, it's all matchups. There's a ton of good teams. I think Indiana gives Milwaukee a ton of issues, especially defensively. Milwaukee doesn't really have that personnel. But then if Indiana were, say, to somehow match up with a team like Orlando, maybe in the play-in, even if both teams kind of fall down a ton, like, you know, any given Sunday. Overall, now that we're kind of in that all-star break, I'm really excited to see how the rest of the season turns out, see what kind of playoff matchups we're getting, because there's definitely some potential here for some great, great battles. You can never count out Miami. I think New York and Cleveland are definitely dark horses. Obviously, Indiana, too, in the East. In the West, I mean, come on. There's so many loaded teams. Obviously, the Nuggets and the Clippers and the Thunder and the Wolves and then the Suns and then the Kings and then the Mavericks and then the Lakers and the Rockets and the Pelicans. Like, there's a lot of good teams, and not all of them are even going to be able to make the playoffs, let alone contend. So I think really just going to have to stick with that answer there with Boston and Milwaukee and the Nuggets and the Clippers. But that's as of right now. There's a lot that could change. That's just based on what I think you need to succeed in the playoffs, and I think just these teams are built to contend, and that's obviously, again, not a slight if I didn't mention your team. I think there's a lot of really good teams in both conferences, but if I'm putting money on if I'm putting money on 4 teams to win the chip, like, someone gives me $50 and they're like, hey, you know, bet something on every single team that you think is going to win, and I got to pick 4 of them, that's my safest bet.